If I didn't have evidence, you wouldn't believe what I'm about to say. Not just because it sounds outrageous, but because it's the kind of thing people only think happens to other people. The messy, broken marriages you whisper about, the kind of betrayal you hear secondhand at brunch and shake your head at because surely there were signs, surely someone must have known. But here's the thing, there weren't signs. Not the kind you could hold in your hand and say, look, this proves it. There were only the little gut feelings you push away, because love teaches you to give the benefit of the doubt. My name is Hannah. I'm 34 years old. And for the last half year, I truly believed my marriage was finally healing. After years of cracks, hurt, and months where I wasn't even sure we'd make it to our anniversary, I thought we were in the middle of a second chance. I thought we were learning how to love each other again. Let's just call him Ethan. Ethan was never the sweep you off your feet kind of man. That wasn't what drew me in. I met him at a mutual friend's barbecue. He was standing by the grill, flipping burgers like he actually knew what he was doing, listening more than he talked. He asked me how I liked my burger cooked, and then actually remembered when it was my turn in line. It sounds small, but after a run of men who couldn't remember my name the next day, it felt like gold. He was steady, solid, the kind of man who called when he said he would, and who noticed when my hands were cold and would quietly tuck them into his jacket pockets. We fell into this easy rhythm. Midweek dinners after work, Sunday morning walks, grocery shopping together like we were already a team. When we got married, I honestly believed I'd hit the jackpot. And for a while, it was good. Until it wasn't. We hit a rough patch that nearly broke us. We yelled. We avoided each other. We spent weeks pretending busy was the reason we didn't talk. But somehow, we decided to try again. That was 6 months ago. The rebuild wasn't magic. We went to therapy. Real therapy. Not the kind where you sit in silence for an hour. We tore into old wounds, heard things we didn't want to hear, and somehow started laughing together again in the kitchen while cooking dinner. We even planned weekend trips, small ones, just a couple hours from home, like a way to remind ourselves that there was still something worth saving. There were moments where I'd catch myself thinking, this is what marriage should feel like the night we stayed up until 2 a.m. talking about our dreams for the next 10 years. Or the afternoon we were driving back from the lake, hands intertwined over the gear shift, and he said, I'm glad we didn't give up. But even during those moments, there were flickers. Nothing huge, just little things that didn't fit. Late-night phone calls he'd take in the garage instead of at his desk. His laptop, once left casually open on the couch, was now always shut, always password protected. Questions about the future, like whether we'd finally take that big anniversary trip to Italy, were met with vague, let's see how things go. I told myself not to overthink it. We were rebuilding. Rebuilding meant trusting again, right? And trust meant letting go of the constant scanning for danger. Then last Thursday happened. I wasn't looking for trouble. I was looking for the warranty papers for our fridge because the ice maker had started doing this weird rattling thing. Ethan always kept that kind of stuff in the bottom drawer of his desk, filed in neat labeled folders. When I opened the drawer, the folders were there. Appliances, taxes, insurance. But wedged behind them was a thick white envelope with my name on it. My full legal name. I thought maybe it was some kind of surprise. Tickets, a letter, something sweet. My heart actually skipped a beat. I pulled it out, sat down right there on the floor, and slid my finger under the flap. Inside was a stack of crisp legal documents. The first page was unmistakable. Petition for dissolution of marriage. And every single signature line, his, mine, the witnesses, was filled. My name typed neatly where it needed to be. His signature in that slanted, almost smug handwriting I'd recognize anywhere. The date? 2 months ago. 2 months ago when we were sitting in therapy talking about rebuilding. 2 months ago when he'd told me, we're in this together. 2 months ago when I was making his favorite pasta and thinking, we're really going to make it. I just sat there, holding them. The sound in my ears went sharp and tinny, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I kept flipping through them, looking for some sign that this was a draft, a mistake, a cruel joke. But every page told me the same thing. I was married to a man who had already legally ended it without telling me. The fridge could have burned the house down at that point, and I wouldn't have noticed. I closed the envelope, slid it back where I'd found it, and walked out of his office. I didn't slam anything, didn't scream. I just stood in the hallway staring at our wedding photo, the one we'd agreed to keep on the wall when we started therapy. His hand on my waist, my smile wide and certain. I had no idea that the man in that photo was already gone. 6 months before I found those divorce papers, Ethan and I were standing on opposite sides of our kitchen, barely speaking. We weren't throwing plates or slamming doors. It was worse than that. We'd gone quiet, detached, like two people politely sharing a space but living separate lives. That was when I told myself the thing I had sworn a long time ago. If a relationship turns into a slow death, I will walk away before it rots me from the inside out. My first heartbreak had dragged on for years because I kept trying when deep down I knew it was already over. I promised myself I'd never waste that much time again. If someone wanted me in their life, they'd have to show up and fight for it. Ethan had been 1 foot out the door back then. I could feel it. He'd stay late at work without telling me, forget to answer messages for hours, and when he did, his responses felt like he was replying out of obligation, not interest. I'd started sleeping on the far side of the bed, just to create distance. So when he finally said, "I want to fix this. I still choose you," I was skeptical. Words were easy, but he didn't just say it. He backed it up. He booked us into a weekend marriage retreat in the countryside, one of those places with open fire pits and long walks built into the schedule so you're forced to actually talk. He looked me in the eye during those sessions and said things I'd been desperate to hear for years. That he'd taken me for granted, that he'd let work consume him, that he'd been scared we'd drift too far to find each other again. It wasn't a perfect fix, but it cracked open the door I'd been holding shut. He made small, consistent efforts after that, sending me a text in the middle of the day just to say he missed me, or actually sitting down to watch a movie without scrolling on his phone. He started saying, "I choose you every day." And for a while, I believed him. My friends had been wary when I told them we were trying again. They'd seen me cry too many times, heard too many excuses on his behalf. But slowly they started to warm back up to him. He made a point of showing up. Dinners, birthdays, little get-togethers. He'd stay longer than he used to, engage in conversations instead of making an early exit. My family was slower to come around. My mother, especially, had that look in her eyes. The one that says, "I hope you're right, but I'm not betting on it." Still, when she saw him help my dad fix the leaky kitchen tap during Sunday lunch, I caught a flicker of cautious approval. We rebuilt our little rituals. Saturday morning pancakes, Tuesday night trivia at the pub, our evening walks around the neighborhood after dinner, just talking about whatever came to mind. It was ordinary, but it felt safe. By the time our anniversary was approaching, I was starting to feel genuinely hopeful. I had even started looking at long-haul flights again, thinking maybe Italy wasn't such a distant dream after all. Then came the first flicker. A week before our anniversary, Ethan called me late in the afternoon to say he wouldn't be home for dinner. "Late work meeting," he said. His voice was rushed, like he was already halfway out the door. I pictured him in his office, suit jacket over the back of his chair, tie loosened, maybe sipping stale coffee while waiting for a client call to end. I told him it was fine. That's what trusting again looked like, right? Not assuming the worst, not reading into every little change of plans. I heated up leftovers, poured myself a glass of wine, and reminded myself that rebuilding meant letting go of suspicion. It didn't occur to me that in just a matter of days, I'd find out exactly how misplaced that trust really was. It started with something small, something so ordinary, I almost didn't think twice about it. Ethan had been working late again. Not unusual in his line of work. He managed accounts for a regional sales company, and last-minute client dinners were part of the job. He came home that night looking tired but in a good mood, loosened his tie, poured himself a drink, and asked how my day had been. 2 days later, while tidying up, I grabbed his jacket from the back of the dining chair to hang it in the wardrobe. When I slipped my hand into the pocket, I felt a piece of paper. I pulled it out, a folded receipt from a boutique hotel downtown. It was for a single night stay in a deluxe suite. The date? The same night he'd said he was working late. I stood there in the bedroom, receipt in hand, feeling the kind of heat that starts in your chest and rises into your throat. When I asked him about it later, I tried to keep my voice casual. "Hey, I found a hotel receipt in your jacket. What's that about?" He barely looked up from his laptop. "Oh, that. Client meeting ran late. and I didn't want to drive home half asleep. They comped the room. It sounded plausible enough, but not quite. "A deluxe suite?" I asked. He gave a short laugh, the kind of laugh people use when they're pretending you've asked something silly. That's what they booked me into. I didn't exactly get a choice. He turned back to his laptop like the conversation was over. And maybe it should have been. We'd promised not to pick apart each other's movements during this rebuild, right? So I told myself to let it go. For a few days, I did. I shoved the receipt into the kitchen drawer with spare batteries and takeaway menus, but something about it wouldn't stop whispering in the back of my mind. Then the message came. It was a Thursday afternoon. My phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown number on WhatsApp. "Hey, are you with Ethan?" My stomach dipped. I typed back before I could stop myself. "Who is this?" Her reply came almost instantly. "My name's Melissa. I've been seeing Ethan for the last few months. He told me he's already separated from his wife." The words seemed to move across the screen in slow motion. My first reaction wasn't even rage. It was disbelief so sharp it felt like vertigo. I typed, "I'm his wife." She didn't reply right away. When she did, it was like she'd been holding her breath. "Then you should know, I thought you two were over. He said you were living separately and only speaking because of paperwork stuff." I stared at the chat until my vision blurred. This wasn't a misinterpretation. This wasn't someone fishing for drama. It was too specific. The timelines, the way she phrased paperwork, it all lined up too neatly with the fact that I had divorce papers hidden in a desk drawer that I still hadn't confronted him about. The pieces were sliding into place, one by one, and they painted a picture I hadn't wanted to see. Melissa and I went back and forth for about half an hour. I didn't tell her about the divorce papers. I just asked questions. How long they'd been seeing each other, where they met, when they last saw each other. Every answer was a fresh cut, because every answer overlapped with weekends he'd been away for work or visiting a client out of town. By the time we ended the conversation, my hands were trembling. I put my phone down and stared at the wall for a long time, hearing his voice in my head from just weeks before. "We're in this together. We're building something again." Except we weren't. He'd been building something else entirely. And in one sentence, he told me you were separated. My marriage went from healing to already dead. I didn't wait long before confronting him. It was that same night. He came through the door in his usual way, keys on the counter, jacket on the back of the chair, and I was already standing there with my phone in hand, Melissa's messages still open like evidence in a courtroom. "Who's Melissa?" I asked. No warm-up, no small talk. His head snapped up, and for a split second there was a flicker in his eyes. Recognition, maybe even fear. But it was gone before I could pin it down. "She's no one," he said, forcing a laugh. "Why? What's she said now?" "Now?" I repeated. "So you do know her?" That's when the script flipped. He leaned against the counter, arms folded like I was the one in trouble. "Listen, she's unstable. I went out with her once or twice after we split, or when I thought we were splitting, and she's been hanging on ever since. She's jealous. She's trying to mess with us because she can't handle rejection." He delivered it with that calm, reasonable tone he used in therapy, the one that made me feel like the irrational one when I cried about the divorce papers. "You told her we were separated," I said, my voice trembling more from holding back than fear. "I might have said that, back when I didn't think we'd make it. But we are making it. And now she's just stirring things up because she doesn't like that I've moved on." Moved on. From her to me. His own wife. He stepped closer, putting a hand on my arm like we were allies in this. "We've been doing so well, Hannah. Don't let her ruin that. You're overreacting. You're twisting her words into something they're not." Overreacting. Twisting. Sabotaging. All words I'd heard before. Not from him, but from every manipulative man I'd ever known. And the worst part? Part of me still wanted to believe him. Because if I didn't, then I'd have to face the reality that our rebuild was nothing but set dressing over a demolished foundation. Over the next week, he leaned into the role of the victim. He told me I had trust issues that were poisoning the progress we'd made, said he felt like no matter how much effort he put in, I'd never see him as anything but a liar. He even started planting seeds with people around us, Little comments to mutual friends about how Hannah's been really on edge lately, or she's having a hard time letting go of the past. And it worked, at least on some of them. One friend called me to say, "Maybe you are being a bit paranoid. You've been through so much together. Don't throw it away over some random woman's DM." Another texted, "Just be careful. Something about him doesn't sit right." The divide was quick and clean. Half of them thought I was spiraling. The other half kept their doubts to whispered phone calls when he wasn't around. Meanwhile, Ethan was the perfect husband in public, holding my hand, asking about my day, posting photos of us at dinner with captions like "date night with my favorite person." It was like watching him paint over mold, pretty on the surface, rot underneath. So I stopped confronting him, stopped asking about the late-night phone calls and the sudden client dinners that popped up like weeds. I let him think I'd swallowed his version of events whole. But inside, I was clocking everything. The shifts in his tone, the gaps in his stories, the moments he thought I wasn't paying attention. I knew the truth would surface. It always does. And when it did, I wanted to be ready. It started like a slow leak. Once you see one crack, your eyes can't help but scan for more. That week, I found myself replaying every moment I'd brushed aside, the work trips that popped up with no warning, the way he'd leave the house with an overnight bag, but never send photos from whatever city he claimed to be in. I used to tell myself he was just bad at keeping in touch. Now I knew he was just careful about what I might see. I remembered the phone calls that ended abruptly when I walked into the room, his hand hovering over the end button like muscle memory, the way he'd smile vaguely and say, "Just work stuff," before changing the subject. Then there were the mornings he'd rush me out of his place with flimsy excuses. "I've got to be at the office early, the cleaners are coming, my brother's dropping by." Always some reason why I couldn't linger. At the time, I thought maybe he just valued his space. Now I wondered whose space it really was. I dug back through my phone, scrolling months into our message history. And there it was. Little red flags hiding in plain sight. Texts that ended mid-conversation for no reason. One minute we'd be talking about dinner plans, and the next, nothing. No reply for hours. Back then I assumed he'd fallen asleep, gotten busy, or just forgotten. Now I could almost map those silences to the times he was probably with her. I started noticing the patterns, gaps that always seemed to fall on weekends I wasn't with him, sudden coldness after stretches of warmth. Even the way he'd sometimes overcompensate, sending extra long syrupy messages after going dark, like trying to make up for time lost. It made me sick to think about how easily I'd accepted those gaps, how quick I'd been to fill them with excuses on his behalf. And then there were the anniversaries. Not the big ones, the little ones. The first time we met. The first time he told me he loved me. Those dates always mattered to me. But more than once, he'd forget until days later, claiming he was swamped with work. I'd let it go, telling myself what we had wasn't about dates on a calendar. Now I realized those work emergencies were just moments when his attention was somewhere else, or on someone else. The hardest part wasn't the lies themselves. It was the realization that the timeline of my marriage wasn't even mine. That the version I'd been living was just one thread in a much bigger web. And she'd been woven into it the entire time. It wasn't just overlap. It was symmetry. While I was planning dinners, she was planning trips. While I was making him coffee in the morning, she was falling asleep next to him at night. While I was rebuilding a marriage, she was being told he was already free. Every moment I'd thought was ours was shared. Every laugh, every kiss, every whispered promise had an echo somewhere else. And when I saw it all laid out like that, the truth hit so hard it felt physical. I wasn't the main character. I was the intermission. When the message came through, I stared at it for a full minute before I could breathe again. "I think we need to talk. In person." It was her, the woman who'd messaged me before, the one who claimed to be with Ethan. At first I thought meeting would be a bad idea, dangerous even. But the longer I sat with the unanswered questions, the more it felt like the only way forward. We picked a small coffee shop downtown. Neutral ground. Bright. Public. Impossible to cause a scene without becoming a spectacle. I got there early, my hands wrapped around a cup I barely sipped from, watching the door. When she walked in, I almost hated how normal she looked. Jeans, sweater, hair pulled back like she hadn't slept much. There was no smugness, no "I've won" smirk, just a tired wariness I recognized in my own reflection. We said each other's names like we were testing the weight of them, and then sat. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the espresso machine filled the silence. Finally, she said, "I don't want to fight. I just want the truth." I let out a bitter laugh. Then I guess we're on the same side. It started slow. I told her about the last year, the therapy, the weekend trips, the conversations about rebuilding. She listened, eyes narrowing at certain dates. Then it was her turn. She talked about dinners at his place, trips to the coast, family holidays, and as we swapped timelines, the pattern emerged like ink bleeding through paper. Every single work trip I'd been told about lined up perfectly with weekends she spent with him. The lake house trip I thought was just for us, he'd been there with her the month before. The late nights at the office, that was him at her apartment. It wasn't overlap. It was choreography. We compared notes like detectives piecing together a case, but the crime scene was my marriage. Every missing piece of my puzzle was sitting in her phone, in her stories, in her memories. Then she dropped the bomb. "We were engaged," she said, her voice steady but eyes locked on mine like she was waiting for me to explode. The words didn't land all at once. "What?" She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. There it was, a photo of them at a vineyard, her hand on his chest, a ring glittering in the sunlight. The caption read, "Here's to forever." I felt my stomach twist hard, like it was trying to push the truth out of me. My ears rang. I forced myself to look at the date. 6 months ago. The exact week Ethan and I had our first therapy session. She kept talking, but my mind was stuck there, frozen on the numbers. "The wedding's booked for next summer," she said. "Venue, caterer, all of it. My dress is in my closet." I gripped the edge of the table to keep from shaking. "And he told you—" "What?" "That you two were already done. That the divorce was just paperwork. That you were holding onto the house until it sold." She gave a bitter smile. "I thought I was the one waiting for him. Turns out so were you." There it was, the full scope. I hadn't been the affair. I'd been the safety net, the backup plan if the engagement fell apart. I stared at her, at the ring she wasn't wearing now, at the way her hands trembled as she tucked her phone away. There was no competition here, just two women holding the same shattered truth. We sat in silence for a while. People around us laughed over lattes, tapped on laptops, lived in worlds that didn't feel like they could exist alongside ours. "He wasn't with me because he loved me," I finally said, my voice low, almost to myself. "He was keeping me in case he lost you." She didn't argue. She didn't need to. I didn't plan the confrontation. There was no cinematic build-up, no rehearsed speech in front of the mirror. It was just me, his phone lighting up on the counter, her name on the screen, and the sudden knowledge that I couldn't carry this weight for another day. When he walked in from the garage, I was already sitting at the kitchen table. My laptop was open, screenshots pulled up in neat little rows. The hotel receipts, the text exchanges, the engagement photos she'd sent me. I'd even printed the timeline we'd pieced together at the coffee shop, because I wanted him to see it, to feel it in black and white. He froze in the doorway, keys still in his hand. "What's all this?" "Sit down," I said. My voice didn't even sound like mine. Low, flat, stripped of anything that could be mistaken for hope. He hesitated, then slowly lowered himself into the chair opposite me. His eyes darted over the laptop screen, the papers, then back to me. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just slid the first page toward him. The hotel receipt from the night he told me he was working late. "You remember this?" His jaw tightened. "That was a client dinner." I pushed the next page forward, a screenshot of her text. "Same room as last time? You remember this too?" He looked away, rubbing the back of his neck. "You're twisting things, Hannah." "Don't," I cut in sharply. "Not this time. I've got all of it, Ethan. Every lie, every trip, every single night you said you were somewhere else and weren't." For a long moment, he just stared at the papers. And then, like he'd been holding his breath for months, he exhaled and leaned back in his chair. "I didn't want to lose Either of you?" It was so casual, so matter of fact, like it was the most reasonable explanation in the world. "You what?" I asked, my voice catching. He shrugged. "You were different things to me. We have history, a life we've been building, but you were what I needed when things with her got heavy." I just stared at him. "You mean when you were planning your wedding?" His eyes flicked up at me, unbothered. "It doesn't mean anything." And that was it. The third and final twist. The wedding was still happening. The venue was booked. The dress was bought. The guest list was set. And to him, it was just another moving piece in whatever game he thought he was playing. "You think marrying her means nothing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's complicated," he said, leaning forward as if that would make me understand. "Look, Hannah, you and we work in a way she and I don't. But she's, I don't know, safe. She's the life I'm supposed to have. Stop." My chair scraped against the tile as I stood. "Don't you dare finish that sentence." He stood too, hands out like he was calming a skittish animal. "I'm not the villain you think I am." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "You're worse, because you want the benefits of being both the husband and the boyfriend without the cost of being either." His mouth opened like he was going to argue, but I'd already turned toward the hallway. My hands were steady now, my breathing even. The decision had been made long before he walked in the door. I just hadn't said it out loud. "Get out," I said, without looking back. "Hannah, now." He didn't slam the door when he left. He didn't try one last apology. He just walked out, taking whatever version of him I thought I knew with him. The silence that followed was sharp, almost alive. I looked at the laptop still open on the table, at the pages spread like evidence in a trial that had finally reached its verdict. That's when it hit me. The clarity I hadn't been able to reach through all the mess and half-truths. Lies aren't accidents, they're strategies. And he'd been playing this game a lot longer than I ever realized. There was no big cinematic goodbye, no tearful airport scene, no screaming match in the driveway. The morning after he left, I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee and my phone, and I did 3 things. I blocked his number. I deleted every photo of him from my camera roll, and I archived every message. Not because I wanted to reread them, but because I never wanted to accidentally see them again. It was quiet work. Mundane, almost boring. But with each click, each confirmation button, I felt the weight shift. A little lighter, a little more mine. The house was still full of him, his mug in the cupboard, his hoodie on the back of a chair. But he wasn't in my head anymore, not in the same way. He'd stopped being the voice I argued with in the shower or the ghost I tried to please. He was just gone. Instead of trying to dissect his lies, I booked my first solo therapy session. No couples counseling, no mediator. Just me, facing what I'd ignored for too long. I wanted to know why I'd swallowed the flickers of doubt, why I'd smoothed over the inconsistencies, why I'd convinced myself that trust meant silence. Week by week, I started piecing myself back together. I went back to the hobbies I'd abandoned when rebuilding meant clearing my calendar for him. I met friends for dinner without glancing at my phone every 10 minutes. I learned how to sleep without waiting for the sound of his car in the driveway. And in that space, the promise I'd made to myself years ago came back. After the last heartbreak, I'd sworn I would never ignore the red flags again. I thought I'd broken that promise this time. But the truth was, I didn't. I saw the signs. I acted. I walked away. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't perfect. But it was mine. My choice. The further I got from him, the clearer the picture became. The privacy he valued wasn't about boundaries, it was about control, about keeping me in the dark so he could move freely in the light. So here's the line I wish I could send to every woman who's ever felt that gnawing doubt in her gut. If someone hides you, it's not because they value privacy, it's because they value options. I thought we were rebuilding. He was just rehearsing his exit.